It was really just about acknowledging that sometimes fun is more important than chasing a dream that you really weren't going to obtain.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Hi Podcast, or the How I Got Here podcast. I'm your host, Trevis Waters, and I created this podcast to share stories that are worth telling, whether it's someone that got from hero to zero, zero to hero, or simply something in between. On today's episode, we're talking to Nic Sulsky, the current CEO of the Curling Group. We get to learn about how he started off early on as wanting to be a professional athlete, how he became one, and how that entire thing shifted from that to film and television to now running the biggest thing in curling in world history. Let's go ahead and jump into our conversation now. Hope you enjoy. Hey guys, it's me, Trevis, with the How I Got Here podcast. Today we're joined for episode number 5 with the man, the myth, the legend. We have Mr. Nic Sulsky here, who I've known for a pretty good chunk of time. I feel like we're approaching 7 years right now, but for those people who have never seen your face, with that glorious beard you have, or have heard your name, kind of give a quick, in 2025, right now, this is your title and your job and what you're working on.
Okay, 2025, my title, and I'm not a big title guy. I actually kind of hate them, but I'm the CEO of the Curling Group. And my mission in life now is to professionalize and monetize properly a sport that everyone around the world falls in love with every 4 years. Put it that way.
And so that's we'll get into that as we get through the chronological timeline more on the curling side, because I'm personally extremely interested in that because I do feel like that is by far and away my favorite Winter Olympic sport. So once I saw you kind of dabbling that stuff, I was like, oh, I need to know more about this. But what I like to kind of lead off this with is as far back that your memory allows, whether it's kindergarten, senior of high school, what is the first time that you had a I want to be this when I grow up? Like, what was your age and kind of what was that first idea?
Wow, that's actually a really great question. So I moved my family, I shouldn't say my family and I moved to Southern California when I was 4 years old. I grew up in Tarzana in the San Fernando Valley. And from basically the age of like 5 until I moved back to Canada. I was born in Montreal, so I moved back to Canada when I was almost 13. I was absolutely obsessed with baseball. I played baseball probably 300 days a year, and I was completely and totally convinced that I was going to be a professional baseball player. Now, as you know, I think, and probably won't be a surprise to many of the folks who are watching or seeing my glorious face. I am Jewish, and there are not very many Jewish Major League Baseball players. I mean, I can probably name most of them because, of course, that's part of my faith being a Jewish baseball lover. So yeah, I wanted to be a professional athlete. Baseball, unfortunately, baseball is not as big as in Canada, recreationally as it is in California. So when I moved back home, there wasn't as much baseball to play. So I shifted my dreams into to other sports that unfortunately I wasn't able to uh, attain that dream. But yeah, I wanted to be a professional athlete my entire life, man. And one thing led to another, and now I find myself at the reins of a sport. So I'm not an athlete, but I'm involved in sports now professionally, which is kind of fun.
So I mean, it's still, yeah, it's definitely interesting that that was the first, I want to do something sports. Well, I mean, baseball at the time, but sports in general. And then we'll kind of learn as we ask more questions on all the twists and turns that happen to get you from baseball player to now still being in the sports space. So I understand the concept of baseball's huge in the U.S. age 5 to 13. This is what you want to do. You go back to Canada, age 13, and yes, I get. Well, I don't know. I'm not Canadian, nor do I live there, but it makes sense that it's not a huge sport recreationally up north. Now, you did mention that you still had the interest of doing something with sports, whether it's athlete or what have you. But when you had that realization that it's probably not going to be baseball, what was like the next thing to kind of kick in as maybe it could be this instead?
Well, I mean, to frame it, just to back up a second, baseball is big in Canada, but obviously we can't play baseball 360 or
Yeah.
300 days a year in Canada, right? So, you know what? I mean, I think that I was still dying to try and figure out how to be a professional athlete. So even in high school, I shifted to football. And then I quickly and I was pretty good, but again, I'm small and I'm Jewish. Not too many Jewish football players out there. Not this is not I'm not racist against Jewish athletes. They're just, I'm just looking at the numbers. I'm a data guy. And then I shifted into rugby, and I was a pretty decent rugby player. I actually, after grad, and I went to university. I played rugby in university, and after graduating university, I was fortunate enough to make something called the the Maccabea men's Canadian rugby team. So the Maccabea Games happens every 4 years in Israel, and I made the Canadian national Jewish team. Went to Israel, still, thinking that maybe there was a career in rugby for me. Um, got to got to Israel, and during the tournament, the Canadian team did not win one game. We played, I believe, we played 6 games and scored one try. So my aspirations to really break through on the international stage, whether it's the Jewish stage or the more conventional World Rugby stage, didn't actually materialize. But I made very good friends with the Australian rugby team that was playing in Israel. And I had just graduated university, and I think my entire life after realizing that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, but my parents always, pushed me to make sure I had a backup plan. And, I did fairly well in school, and my backup plan was going to be to go to law school. Again, insert Jewish joke here. And I got to Australia, or I got to Israel, and played in the MACB games, and I realized that I just didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to go to school again right away. So the Australians invited me to move to Australia and play rugby with them. They played together, or the coach of the Australian team coached a team in Australia, invited me to come down and play, and I was like, sure, I got nothing better to do. So I continued to chase that dream, and I moved to Australia, and I lived there for around a year. My rugby career in Australia lasted around 3 weeks. What I realized is being an average, above average rugby player in Canada means you're a dog shit rugby player in Australia. And I'm 21 years old. I'm in Australia. And what am I going to do? So I had to get a job. I think I got my first like real job. I worked at like summer camp when I was growing up. Um, but that's not a real job. So I got my first real job in Australia. I sold clothes. I worked for a spree, and I sold clothes from a retail perspective, kind of around in stores. Which not my career aspiration, but it was a good experience. And then I moved back to Canada, and I spent a year as a ski bum, and that's when um, I had decided that I wanted to get involved in film and television. I enjoy smoking weed, and now it's legal in Canada, so good for us. And I'd always been a good writer, and I'd always been pretty creative. Always loved film and television, and I couldn't be an athlete, and so I started writing. And then I decided that I wanted to get involved in the film and television industry, and then the next dream that I had was to be, this was right around, time when all the auteur writer directors were exploding, the Paul Thomas Andersons and the Quentin Tarantinos, um, and the Kevin Smiths of the world. And so then I decided that I was going to be a film writer, director, and producer, and that kind of started the next phase of my career of chasing dreams that were unattainable.
Going back a little bit, so you were in the rugby contest in Israel where the Australian coach is like, "Hey, come play for us." So you said like a slightly above average player, rugby player in Canada is a horrible Australian rugby player, but was it was it like you just having a really good time in terms of your playing while you're in this tournament in Israel that he's like, oh, this guy's probably pretty good? It was like, was it your personality that charmed him, or was it just like what happened to where, yeah, come play over here in Australia, and then 3 weeks later he's like, oh, you're not that good.
Well, I think I'd like to think it was my on-field ability and not my charm that convinced the coach to invite me down to Australia. But at the end of the day, I became pretty friendly with the Australians, and I wasn't terrible. I wasn't terrible on the field, and and I will say it wasn't the coach that told me that I wasn't good enough to keep playing. I was, I was on the third division of this team or of this club, and 5 days a week practicing, and I wasn't making any money really at this point, and so it just became a reality that playing the third. And let's face it, I mean, at the end of the day, um, when you're an athlete and you get used to playing at a certain level, not that vanity is a good thing, but you get comfortable in your place, right? Whether you're in the starting 15 of your university team, you're on the starting roster of a provincial team, you're on the starting roster of an international team, whether it's a Jewish international team or not. And then you get to a situation where you have to kind of swallow your pride and realize that one, you're getting the shit kicked out of you for no money 5 days a week, and you're playing on the third division where nobody really gives a crap. And it was just one of those things where, and being in Australia for the first time ever, and being a young Canadian. And Australia, I don't know what it's like now, but it used to have a really incredible backpacker culture where, travelers from all over the world go to Australia, and there's like backpacker buses where you can buy a ticket and you can go to any city you want and jump off and jump on, and it hostels everywhere. It was a fun, and it was a party, and the weather was great. It was just one of those things where I was like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna do that. I think I'm gonna just have some fun for a while, right? And it took me a couple years to get out of that world, because after I lived in Australia, I moved. I'm from Montreal, but the one constant in my life is a town called Mont Tremblant, which is a big ski town in Quebec, about an hour and a half north of Montreal. And that's like the one through line of my life. Like, my family has always had a place there. I mean, they don't anymore, but when I was growing up. And so after spending just over a year in Australia, I got back and decided that I was gonna spend a year as a ski bum and live in Tremblant. I mean, it's a four-season resort, so it's not just skiing, it's mountain biking and all that. So it took me a couple of years to kind of rally myself, but that was a good stretch. But to answer your question more directly, it it was really just about acknowledging that sometimes fun is more important than chasing a dream that you really weren't going to obtain. So, and I was at the age in life where you could do that, right? I
Yeah.
I was lucky.
So, with the complete shift of sport athleticism to film, television, possibly movies or movies, film, same thing. I don't know why I just said both of those. You know what I'm trying to say. So, film and television. Did you have the notion of I think this is what I want to do, so let me go to school and get a degree in this, or is it just this is what I want to do, let me just start doing it?
Yeah, I just started doing it. I mean, if you listen to, it's funny. I was when in trauma, I actually managed the local video store, and there are there are two. Well, Kevin Smith worked at a comic store, I believe. I don't think he managed the video store, but during Clerks, if you remember that movie, you're young, you may not remember Clerks. Obviously, Randall, one of the stars of Clerks, managed a video store. Quentin Tarantino famously ran a video store, right? So here are these two icons. And when I was in my early 20s, these were the movies, Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy, and of course, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown. I was like, oh man, well, they could do it, I could do it. So I just started writing. And of course, you know, uh, that became, I didn't go to school for it. But that became kind of my obsession. Now, I remember one morning I was riding up a chairlift, and on that chairlift, just randomly, were these two ladies. And as you've known me for a little while, I'm kind of chatty, and to be candid, I was kind of high. And they started, they were clearly new to Tremblant, and I was just like, hey, I'm a local, do you want any advice where to ski? And then I helped them a little bit. And then they said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I explained to them that I was living here, but I'm writing, and my goal is to get into the film and television industry." And they said, "Oh, well, there's something called the Canadian Film and Television Production Association, and they run an internship program, and you can apply through Heritage Canada, and that might be an interesting way to get into the industry." And I was like, "Wow, that's kind of interesting." So I got off that chairlift and I did some digging around and I saw that this actually was the case. And ultimately, that random conversation on that chairlift sparked kind of what became the beginning of my career in film and television, which was just super random. The one through line of my life, I think, outside of Mont Tremblant being the through line of my childhood. Now I've used that phrase twice. Is I believe in something. I believe in harnessing the randomness, and so what that means is random things happen to people all the time, right? And either you're open to accepting and rolling with some of those things and seeing where they might end up, whether it's people you meet, whether it's ideas you have, or what have you, and people that don't. And I happen to um, really enjoy kind of opening myself up to new things, new ideas, new people, and then just seeing what happens and throwing the dice. I'm a bit of a gambler, no pun intended. Um, so yeah, that chairlift ride is actually what started my career in the film and television industry because that led to an internship that I was able to get through Heritage Canada, which is one of our great taxpayer funded government bodies up here in Canada.
So this is a part of. I mean, like I said, we keep saying that we know each other for now for going on 7 years. So I don't know if I ever knew that that was a part of your life in terms of that you were part of that industry because I think we first met the end of 2018. I think is when we first had our first partnership together, and that was when I was like 2 years removed from hosting shows for Nickelodeon for about 7 years. So that's very interesting to me that you were kind of in that realm, and I had around that time, and I had no idea. So I also love the randomness stuff because it's the things that can happen when you're sitting next to just somebody you've never met before. You strike up a conversation, and that can spiral into and snowball into, pun intended, uh, into the opportunity that you already have interest in something, and now you can actually do something with that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have that as well, and if somebody's going to strike up a conversation with you, they don't come off like a weirdo. I mean, Nick at the time wasn't a weirdo because he said he was a very attractive person. Just strike up a conversation and have that. Anything can happen. It's not guaranteed that it's going to elevate your career, expedite your career, but I like the fact that that's what happened to you in that case. Now, how you did this internship, you wanted to be part of this industry. How long were you actually in? So after your internship, when did you actually start doing things? I guess like start building your resume in the film and television industry.
So um, you're going to enjoy this because first of all, now I realize why we got along so well. Right when we met, candidly. Um, Excuse me, because I actually had a career in kids television. So I was doing an internship at a place called the Canadian Screen Training Center. And that there was a seminar. I was just like an intern. There was a seminar that was being run by two ladies, Kathy Lee Porter and Virginia Thompson. Now, those two ladies are very popular because, and I don't know if they were the creators or they were the producers, but I think they were the producers and the creators of a show called Degrassi Junior High. Now, I think Degrassi is, a very popular show. Thanks to Kevin Smith, another callback to a previous person we were talking about earlier. Not to mention, it's kind of iconic Canadiana. Anyway, so they were doing a seminar, and my job. They had a focus group of kids, and my job was just to harness the kids, like make sure they were okay, make sure they're having a good time, make sure they were in a good mood when the questions were going to be asked to them by the attendees of the seminar. And after the seminar, they came over to me and they asked me, they said, they thanked me for what I was doing. And they asked, what do you want to do in the industry? And I was like, I don't really know. I mean, I want to write and I want to direct. And they said, well, you should really think about kids' television because you're really good with kids. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I remember I was walking home that I was walking home that night, and I was thinking about kids television, and I grew up in sleepaway camp. Now in Canada, in Quebec especially, or I mean, I guess all over Canada. But I when I was 8 years old until I was effectively 20 years old, every summer I went to sleepaway camp. And so that's one of the reasons why I was pretty good with kids. But I started thinking about that. And this was 1998. So I was 23 years old. Um, I'm 50. There you go. Oh no, I broke the veil of mystery. Um, and so I remember walking home that night and thinking about sleepaway camp and thinking, oh my God, wait a second. What an incredible world this is, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of kids that exist within these summertime locations where maybe there's one or two people over the age of 30 and they're self-sustaining and it's like Lord of the Flies. I was like, huh, that could make for a really interesting television show, like the real, the real life of Sleepaway Camp. Now, this is before Survivor ever existed, right? So I came up with this idea for this show, and then I started asking questions around how do you make a show? Like I had no idea. Like, what do you need? So I wrote some proposals, I wrote some Bibles, and I started talking to people about it. My family, my parents were the first people I talked about this with, and my father especially, he was really enamored with the idea. He thought it was a great idea, and so he mentioned it to some of his friends, and effectively, I was able to raise a little bit of money from my father and my father's friends to go and uh, shoot a TV show. Now, I had no idea how to do a TV show, but I was living in Ottawa, Ontario at the time, the capital of our country. And so through the internship program, I had met a lot of people, and I met this incredible cinema videographer, young guy. He was probably only, remember, I was like 23 at the time. And I think Christian was like 19 at the time. He had shot some music videos or whatever, short films. And we met through another friend named Ben Miner, who was also, and he was even younger. Um, he was working at the same place as an intern. He knew Christian because there was a very small production community in Ottawa, and then they introduced me to another person named Matthew Klink. Now, do you remember Tom Green?
Yeah.
You know who Tom Green is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Tom Green's from Ottawa, and this was right around the time when Tom Green was starting to kind of blow up on local Canadian television. There was a group of kids that would follow him around to kind of learn what he was doing, like kind of like the movie Rushmore, right? Like Rushmore like kids, like just like freaky genius. I'm just gonna do this shit kind of kids. And this one guy in particular, Matthew Klink, he and two of his friends created their own show that was on local on Ottawa television called I forget what it was called before it got onto Canadian television. But anyway, I met this guy Matthew, and he had actually produced things. He actually made things, and he was young, but he just did shit. And so I actually was introduced to him through Christian because Christian didn't believe, like Christian loved my idea of doing a show about sleepaway camp, loved the idea of me having money to do it, told Matthew, and Matthew was like, "That's bullshit. I've heard this a billion times. There's no way. He's full of it. Let me meet him. I'll vet this guy for you." And we sat down over lunch, and 4 hours later, Matthew had agreed to join the show as well because I'm a passionate guy. I can tell a good story. Anyway, so there we go. Me and like five other people, we got in a van and we just went and we just shot this show. We went to six sleepaway camps across North America, and we just filmed all summer long. Then we put together a trailer to a show. And keep in mind, I'm like, this is 99 as we finally finished. I jumped on a train from Montreal to go to Toronto to pitch this show. The show was called Marshmallows for Breakfast. I love random names, as I know doesn't surprise you at all. So Marshmallows for Breakfast. I went on a train to Toronto to pitch this show. Now this was 5:30 in the morning. I leave Montreal, and uh, the way it works is the train from Montreal stops in Dorval, which is where the airport is outside Montreal, and then it goes straight to Toronto. That's the way the express train works. So I got on a Montreal at 5:30 in the morning. At 6 a.m., it stopped in Dorval. At 6 a.m., a bunch of people came onto the train, and this person ended up sitting next to me. The person that ended up sitting next to me on my way to pitch my very first television show ever um, became my wife, and we've been married now for over 20, it's going to be 22 years in October. So as I'm going to Toronto to pitch my very first kids show, I meet my wife. So I go and I pitch this show in Canada. The entertainment world, it doesn't work the way typical, that you would think. It's like a great idea gets funded right away. There's like an old boy world or an old person world. You got to wait your turn. Anyway, so I got a lot of really interesting feedback about the show, but they were like a lot of like I remember sitting in with a person that was running CBC Kids at the time, and this is before Survivor ever ever premiered. So I was calling this show a pop documentary because what is this? There's no script, there's nothing. So I called it a pop doc. The term reality television never actually existed when I was pitching off this show, and so the feedback that I was getting was, this is fucking really cool, but what the hell is it? And who are you? And like, what's going on here? So unfortunately, the show was never picked up. The trailer, the pilot episode only exists on VHS tape. That's how old I am. But the Family Channel, which is like the Canadian Disney Channel, they liked the show and they liked me and my team enough where they said, "Hey, we're trying to figure out how to rebrand our network. Why don't you come up with a pitch?" So I was like, "Sure." So I ended up coming up with a show idea. They bought it, and I became I produced, directed, and hosted my own kids television show on the Family Channel in Canada for a couple of years. Me and a couple puppets traveled across the country, talking to kids and having adventures. Anyway, there's a long-winded description of that experience with a little bit of love and relationship dabbled in there for you.
You know that you could take the VHS, digitize it, and put it up on YouTube. So why has that not happened yet?
Dude, I've been busy, man. I'm like, I've been busy. No, you're so right.
You
There's
still
so
have the
much.
VHS though, right?
I do still have the VHS. I should do that. And you know what's really unfortunate also, man, is my kids' television show that was on the Family Channel. That existed before YouTube. So that's not even online. And yet what I do is like this is what I do to show like my friends or my team is I'll videotape clips. I'll use my phone and I'll film my television in the basement because I don't have a DVD player upstairs because that's just crazy. So like I videotape it and then I put it on our Slack or I text it to people. I haven't even digitized that stuff yet. Like for somebody that likes to pretend they're really, really busy all the time, like I really got to get around to do or accomplishing things. Sorry, I really got to get around to digitizing my youth in television history.
I think that'll be very interesting. Just even if it's just for like your friends and family, of just like sending them a link as opposed to a camera recording of a TV recording of a VHS tape. But
True.
yeah, I mean, you are a
It's
busy
true.
person, so you'll eventually there'll be a time when you're not a
There
busy
will be a
person.
time.
Maybe 5 years from now, 30 years from now, 120 years from now, who knows? But hey, you got a task as soon as you have time. Uh,
I'm going to do it tomorrow. You know what? This is good motivation. I'm going to do
so
it tomorrow.
to hold you to that, this
Yeah.
video will not be blasted until like over a week from today. So you have till this video gets blasted on LinkedIn, which I believe is Friday, August. I'm trying to remember what day the calendar month it is. That's the 15th. So you have from now to the 15th to include those YouTube links, send them to me, and then when we blast this video on LinkedIn and everywhere, I'm gonna include them in the comments. Like, hey, here's what he was talking about at minute, I don't know, minute 28 or whatever. I think that'll be very interesting to look. I mean, people that don't know you probably won't really care, but the people that know you and now know that that's part of your history and your background, I feel like it'd be pretty interesting. Now, there's still a good chunk of time. So we're like in the 1999. I met you and connected with you in 2018. So that's roughly a 20-year window there of almost 20 years anyway, of you going back to Canada from Australia, you wanting to do the film and television, you doing all of the stuff there, filming the pilot, and then getting this opportunity with the Family Channel. How much of the time left between us meeting each other and you doing this family rebranding is you in the film and television space?
Wow. Not that long, actually. Um, you know, what I realized when I got into the film and television industry in Canada is that if you really want to make it, and let's face it, I mean, this is going to sound pretty superficial, but I wanted to make money. Like candidly, like I think a lot of people, but I wanted to make money, and I love film and television. But it became pretty clear to me that if you really wanted to make money in film and television and you really wanted to break through, you had to leave Canada. And I grew up in Los Angeles. It's a great city, but I had zero interest in moving back there. I just didn't want to. I loved Canada at the time, and I didn't want to leave. So, and I could have had a good career in Canada. You could make your money being a television director or whatever, but it was not the type of like lucrative career that I aspired to when I was dreaming about being in the industry. So, I realized that and I realized that I would have to kind of shift my ideas. But when I was doing that Family Channel show, and here will be the tangent into our lives together, when I was doing that Family Channel show, there was a very popular sports talk show in Canada on TSN, which is effectively at the time it was like the Canadian ESPN, the Sports Network is this acronym. And there was a very popular talk show called Off the Record. Off the Record was hosted by an individual named Michael Landsberg, and it was a sports talk show. I guess you would think of it as it was kind of like the precursor to like the Best Damn Sports Show. Basically there was a host and they would have four guests and they would talk about the topics of the day, and they would have athletes, but then they would have like B and C level kind of just celebrity people who would talk about sports go on the show. And I remember one day I just emailed the producer of the show saying, hey, I'm on the Family Channel. I played rugby for Canada. I didn't specify the Jewish team, but whatever, water under the bridge. And I'd love to talk about sports. Can I come and do your show? And he was like, sure. Eventually, I was able to I did a show. So I remember the first episode of Off the Record was actually the 10th anniversary of the Blue Jays winning the World Series. So I got to do it with Candy Maldonado, which was super exciting, and candidly, he was still drunk when we were doing the show, which was also kind of interesting. Um, and then the show was fun, and then I was asked about 5 or 6 months later to do the show again, and I was like, "That's cool." And then I remember after doing that show, the producer pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this, like." Because I'll talk about anything. I don't care. I'll take any angle of a debate. That's just kind of fun, right? And they said, listen, we like to have a number of guests that we can call whenever we are want to make sure that we can keep the conversation going. Like if they have a guest that they're a little bit scared isn't necessarily going to be as open or as animated or as dynamic. So they have these like they call them like fighters or the guarantees where they know that even if the conversation dwindles, the host can like say, all right, like attack dogs. So I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of fun. I gotta tell you, man, the amount of times I promoted the use of steroids in sports on that show, because of course this is around the Barry Bonds, McGuire, Sosa time, and everyone was against steroids in sports, and candidly, so was I. But I was like, my angle was always, man, I'm a fan. I'd love to see a 600-foot home run, all that kind of shit, like whatever. Um, when I started doing that show all the time, and this was right around the time when I got completely and totally obsessed with fantasy sports. So this was probably 2006, 2007. I was completely hooked with fantasy, but there wasn't a lot of fantasy sports content out there. The producer of Off the Record was also a big fantasy sports guy. And we both came up with an idea where um, the way that the off the record was shot was they had a crew, but the crew basically it was booked for 2 hours, but the show was only 1 hour long. So we pitched the concept to TSN where it's like, hey, let us do a fantasy show. Use the crew. We'll use the same set, but we'll make it a fantasy show. You could put it up online. There wasn't a lot of broadband like online content those days, and especially none around fantasy sports. So they agreed. We did something called the Fantasy Hockey Report, and I wasn't even a big hockey fan. I know blasphemous as a Canadian, um, but we did something called the Fantasy Hockey Report. Did that for 2 years, and then I started thinking about the intersection of fantasy sports and technology. And because one of the producer along the way told me something that I'll never forget is like the best producers produce content that they are passionate about, that they love fantasy sports. So I was like, man, there's something really interesting here. And so it was 2008. I came up with an idea for my very first startup. It was called InGamer, and it was a real-time fantasy sports game where you would pick 5 players before the game starts, and then you would change your players during the game. And still, candidly, Trevis, no one's ever fucking built that yet. And we built it, right? But there, you can't monetize it because you can't do that for real money because of the nature of the regulations and such. Um, but I got to tell you, like we built InGamer on my first startup, raised some money, licensed it to a number of media companies in Canada, and actually one in the States. And then, unfortunately, because the business model was flawed, that startup failed. But that kind of led me. That kind of broke the ice for me in the fantasy sports world, which is how we met. That then, I went from there, and then I'll jump really quick so I know we're running out of time. Went there to a company called Sportech, and then as a part of Sportech, I architected a deal to acquire Draft Day. Draft Day at the time was a pretty big daily fantasy sports company, but this was right around the time when FanDuel and DraftKings was absolutely exploding. So this would have been 2014, 2013, 2014. Acquired Draft Day, started operating Draft Day in 2015, left Draft Day the summer of 2017 and joined forces with an incredible dynamic businessman by the name of Bill Asher. Bill Asher and I joined forces, and and then September of 2017, right after Bill and I joined forces, I'd had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma since 2009. I had to go through chemo starting September of 2017 after joining forces with Bill and starting to work with him in July, and so that was a pretty interesting experience. I worked the entire time through chemo, and then September of 2018, we unveiled and launched Monkey Knife Fight for the first time, which is how we met. You were our biggest and most important affiliate partner that helped us build our business, and I will thank you officially in front of the world for helping us get to January of 2021 when Bally's bought Monkey Knife Fight for $90 million USD. And then I left Bally. Bally's. I mean, I worked there for a very short period of time, but that was right when sports betting was becoming legal in Ontario, and I joined a company called PointsBet, and I helped build the Canadian business for PointsBet, and then I left PointsBet in the spring of 2023, and now I work in curling. There you go.
I there's a lot of things in there that I didn't know. Granted, I don't know if we've actually spent an hour talking about pre Monkey Knife Fight, but I don't know. That's why I love doing these things. That I learn things as well by asking questions. So it's a very very interesting path. Actually, I don't know if I knew that you had cancer pre us meeting. So that's something that's was shocking to me to learn. Glad that you're still here, of course, even if that beard is a little crazy. Uh,
You can't get rid of me, man. Come on.
and so the two more things I want to touch on. The first thing is you kind of touched on the curling group and what you're doing now at the very beginning when you're kind of introducing yourself as the CEO, even though you hate the titles. Give a quick overview of what that is, and then what you, in the best case scenario, want to see that become.
Well, I mean, I'll start at the end. I mean, the curling group in the sport of we're building. It's going to be $1 billion business. I mean, straight up. I mean, at the end of the day, we founded the curling group last summer or last spring. We acquired the biggest curling event series in the world called the Grand Slam of Curling. It's existed. This is the 25th year of the Grand Slam of Curling. We acquired that asset from Rogers, from Sportsnet, the biggest Canadian sports media company. Um, and what we are going to do in the spring of 2026, right after the Olympics, is we're going to launch the first ever professional curling league called Rock League. Curling is the most underserved sport in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It is absolutely blowing up around the globe. Over 280 million people engaged with over 10 hours of curling content last year. It's blowing up in Asia. It's been big in Canada for a long time. Um, During the Olympics, it's the most watched Winter Olympic sport. The whole world falls in love with curling every 4 years. But the problem for curling is it's been run historically by a bunch of not for profit international sports associations whose goals and motivations aren't business. It's about the grassroots development of the sport, which is great. But there's never actually been a business entity to really focus on how to build a proper foundation and ecosystem to help bring more sponsors into support the sport and most importantly the athletes. Obviously, sponsors need eyeballs and engagement to be able to monetize or to be able to justify investment, and that's what we've acquired with the Grand Slam. We acquired the Grand Slam of curling. We distributed games for the first time all over the world, had remarkable success. The Grand Slam of curling is going to be profitable for the first time ever next year. And then coming out of the Olympics, we're going to launch a pro league. I am, curling is such a fun sport. I'm not a curler, but these athletes are unbelievable. And I'll tell you, Travis, the thing that excites me the most about this is, you know, there's been a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk in private equity and venture these days around emerging sports leagues and teams and franchises, and a lot of talk about women's sport and the growth of women's sport. Women's sports is great, right? But what's exciting to me about curling is we are building the first mixed gender professional sports league, meaning men and women are going to be playing together on the same ice. If you were to rank the top 10 curlers on planet Earth, irregardless of gender, there would be women on that top 10 list. So name another sport that you could say the same thing for. It doesn't exist. So we talk about equality in sport. One of the things that excites me the most about curling, regardless of the $1 billion opportunity and how excited I am to create a star system around this sport and to finally highlight how incredibly fun and exciting and dramatic the sport and these athletes are, we talk about equality in sport. It's curling. These players are all mic'd up, and we're going to have men and women playing together against each other. And that to me is really freaking exciting, especially in light of everything that is happening in the sports and media world right now.
Do you think so? I know you mentioned this Rock League is going to launch after the Olympics conclude. For the next Winter Olympics, are you? Is there a plan right now to have like the people competing for whatever country they're competing for that are involved with in any way with the curling group or this new upcoming league? Are we gonna see like Rock League like hats or swag or something incorporated into like the Olympics? Is that something that you've thought about, or is that something that's even possible or allowed?
So, um, obviously, the Olympics and the IOC are very, very particular around the types of brands that are exposed, expressed during the field of play, so to speak.
Yeah,
But what we've seen, especially over the last 8 years, is there's this thing called social media that exists. that is very hard to regulate.
Right.
Let's just put it that way, or very hard to put strict rules on. So while the curling group in Rock League won't have any direct um, exposure during the actual Olympics themselves, a lot of our incredible athletes who are going to be participating in Rock League will be in the Olympics. So we are thinking about ways that we can showcase the sport without um, butting up against the rules and regs that we want to and have to respect, not only from the IOC, but World Curling, which is the governing body of our sport.
That makes sense. To wrap up this great podcast episode, the question I like asking at the end is if you were to look back on the entire history, going back to where you were thinking early on that you wanted to be in the sports space as an athlete to where you are now running the first mixed gender curling or first mixed gender professional league in general, and then also it being curling. What is the one thing? So, if you're going to look at the entire history and you're going to find throughout all of the different butterfly effect scenarios that had to fall into place for you to be where you are now, what is the number one thing throughout the entire history of your professional life or personal life that because that happened, you are now the CEO of the curling group?
Wow. The one thing, eh? So this is going to sound really freaking weird, but
I'm
I
ready. I'm
actually
ready for it.
think, no, man, like, I actually think that the one thing that did it for me was getting cancer. Like, when I got diagnosed in 2009, you know, it kind of it shook my worldview, but what it also did was it helped um it helped insulate me from fear, like fear of failure. You know, it what it but and I've talked about this before. I've talked about this once before. But what it allowed me to be able to do is learn how to compartmentalize. Because one of the things, I obsess over things a lot. I'm a little OCD, and um, one of the things that it took me a long time to get over was having cancer. Right? I spent like months and months, maybe even a year, just like thinking about it nonstop. Like lymphoma, like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is cancer of the lymph nodes, obviously. So even to the day, I'll feel my armpits, my neck, my groin all the time, just because OCD. Um, it took me a long time to be able to not just think about that. And when I learned how to separate my fear of cancer, my fear of, it's not even fear of dying, it's just fear of the bullshit that comes with having to go through treatment, which freaking sucks. When I was able to compartmentalize that, that was the start of me being able to actually learn how to compartmentalize very efficiently across. It started as like two, and now I can do three, four, five. If it wasn't, if I, if I hadn't been diagnosed, I don't think I'd be able to manage being a startup entrepreneur and a husband and a father, because it's hard to be able to turn things off and focus and give people that you love and things that you need to focus attention on their due, right? So, you know, if it wasn't for that, I think I'd be more scared about taking the chances and the risks that I have as far as my career goes. I made a lot of bets on my career path, no pun intended. But I think that if it wasn't for me having cancer and learning how to compartmentalize, I'd probably be divorced right now. I'd probably, I'd like to think that my daughter would still love me, but I work very hard, and I don't shut off. I don't have an off switch, but I don't need one, because now I've been I'm able to shift like bob and weave from topic to topic, and person to person and conversation to conversation and moment to moment without without making that other person feel like I'm not fully there, right? So yeah, I think that, yeah, it's weird, but I think that if I hadn't gotten cancer, I probably would not be where I am right now.
No, I it's weird for me to say that I really enjoy that answer because of course that answer is cancer, but it and how you took that situation and I wouldn't say applied yourself, but just kind of grew from that and became the person you are today. So that wraps up episode numero 5. I appreciate your time, Nick, as always. I am looking forward to not only the Olympics, but of course the launch of this Rock League. And I need to know what I have to do to be a professional athlete in this league because I have been a fan of curling, and this isn't exaggerating at all, since like the first time I ever saw the Winter Olympics on TV. That is, like you said, the most popular Winter Olympic sport. And there's gonna be a million different reasons for it, but I think it is because it's so, in terms of like the rules and watching it, it's so simple to watch and enjoy. Like if I'm watching rugby or cricket, which are not two incredibly popular sport, not the most popular sports in the US, I'm sometimes like, okay, why did they just get 10 points for this and 1 point for that? Like this doesn't make sense. But curling is who has the most rocks in the middle, and I understand the point circle thing, and so I feel like that's how people that like you don't need to sit next to somebody and ask them what the rules are. You can just watch it, and enjoy it. But yeah, definitely appreciate your time as always. If there's any last 2 cents you want to drop for the viewing and listening public before we wrap this up, the floor is yours.
No, I all I want to say is I'm excited to see and hear where you take this podcast because you are one of those people that I've crossed paths with in my life that have made an impact. So I'm excited to see where this podcast goes, and I'm always excited to see where you go because there aren't a lot of you out there. So, dude, congratulations on getting the podcast launched, and I'm super excited to become one of your biggest fans.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks again for joining us here, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.